Story 1. I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to before to look for a place to live. My boyfriend flew with me. Before the trip, I researched all sorts of apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. Our first appointment was in the afternoon in this sort of remote residential area. The landlord had actually forwarded some information for us, instructing us to call him an hour before the appointment to confirm or come in. I did, but he didn't answer. So my boyfriend and I started walking up to the home, hoping he would show up maybe 10 minutes before the appointment. He called me. "You come in," he said, sounding like an older man with a very strange, slow way of talking. I just thought he was older and confirmed, "Yeah, we're at the house now, coming up to the front." He got extremely upset. "You never told me you had a boyfriend. You never said that." No, it never crossed my mind to tell him this information, I explained, clarifying that my boyfriend wouldn't be coming to live with me, he was just helping me while looking for apartments. After a very long pause, the man said, "I'm sorry. It's just sometimes people don't tell me when they're married, and it surprises me. No, I'll see you very soon," before hanging up. I told my boyfriend about what the man had said, and he was immediately weirded out. He wanted to leave. But honestly, there were very slim pickings in terms of real estate. So I stupidly said that we had to stay, just in case. As we were discussing staying, we saw a man leave the house we were supposed to view. This man was young and extremely sketchy looking, with greasy hair and weird eyes. He took one look at us and ran out of the home to his car, pulling away from the curb with a screech. Now, we were thoroughly weirded out, but it still wasn't enough for us to bail. We looked at each other, both wondering what to do, when the landlord finally arrived. He's in his 50s, very tall, with a very strong look and his eyes completely blank, empty of warmth or emotion, I observed to my boyfriend. As the man slowly walked up to us, he said, "I'd shake your hands, but mine are dirty, from work." His statement hung in the air, followed by an uncomfortable silence. I tried to keep my answers as vague as possible, I confessed to my boyfriend, who was growing increasingly uneasy. Meanwhile, he asked the landlord questions, but the man refused to answer most of them. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the landlord mentioned the meter probably being in the basement. This is when I should have noted the red flags, I admitted, regretting my lack of action. But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe we were just being paranoid. My boyfriend, however, was ready to bolt. As the man led us towards the detached part of the house, he opened a door, revealing stairs leading into darkness. He flipped the switch, but the light didn't come on. Instead of reacting normally, the landlord simply said, "Come on down," and descended into the darkness. "There's nothing to see if the light itself is dead," my boyfriend remarked, but the landlord remained motionless in the dark. Eventually, he climbed back up the stairs and closed the door without saying a word. Throughout the tour, the man's behavior grew increasingly bizarre and unsettling. He tried to box us into small rooms, kept reaching into his pockets, and provided vague answers to our questions about the property. Everything felt off, from the supposed grad student living there to the strange excuses for not showing us the attic. Finally, we made our excuses and hurriedly left. The man followed, pretending to go to his car before slowly making his way back home. We couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Later, we discovered that the man was a pillar of the community, but there was no evidence of him owning or managing a real estate company as he claimed. The address he provided was real, but it was known to be weird and best avoided. "It's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me," I admitted to my boyfriend, "and I'm so glad I didn't go there alone." Story 2. My girlfriend Kylie and I decided to buy an apartment together. She was browsing Craigslist and stumbled upon a luxurious penthouse apartment for only $300 a month. It seemed too good to be true, overlooking the city with a beautiful bed and a big bathtub. Kylie called the man listed and arranged for a viewing. She mentioned me and my boyfriend are on our way, and the man on the phone seemed surprised, replying, "Oh, all right. I didn't know you were having people come with you." We decided to check it out, but as we approached the apartment, we were taken aback. It looked rusty and neglected, with overgrown grass surrounding it. Exchange glanced at each other nervously as a greasy-looking man approached us, wearing a white tank top, tan shorts, and a scruffy beard with braided hair. He pointed at me and said, "You stay downstairs, young man coming from Canada. I'd never experienced anything like this. Carly, being from Australia and tough, would handle the situation if things got out of hand." As I waited downstairs, I heard a faint scream coming from the basement. Initially, I brushed it off, thinking it was just a kid playing outside. But when I heard it again, I decided to call the police and report what was happening. The police arrived after 20 minutes, and Carly confided in me that she wanted nothing to do with the place. I mentioned the screams from the basement, and it turned out the man was wanted in another state. The screaming downstairs came from a woman named Stephanie, who was interested in the apartment. In reality, the place was a filthy house with women's clothing scattered everywhere. That experience taught us to never trust Craigslist blindly. Now, Colleen and I live in a lovely rent-to-own home in Oregon County. The lesson learned: don't always believe what you see on Craigslist. Story 3. Back in my younger days, when I still lived at home, I had what turned out to be one of the most dangerous encounters of my life. I was looking to move and had arranged to see a place in the perfect location that I found on Craigslist. It seemed like a good deal. 2 seemingly professional roommates were going to show me around. At the last minute, my boyfriend suggested joining me because there were places nearby we might want to visit afterward. When we arrived, I introduced myself, and one of the roommates seemed a little taken aback by the fact that I had someone with me. It might have seemed unusual to bring my boyfriend, but I shrugged it off. Oh well, I thought, the damage has already been done. If they don't allow me in simply because he's with me, I can't deal with it. Let's just see the place. The apartment was huge, and we were both subtly impressed until we turned the corner of the living room and saw it a 2-camera setup with a light pointed at the couch. A guy was sitting on the couch and was introduced as the other roommate. He jumped off the couch and gave my boyfriend the same weird look. It dawned on me what they were looking at, and it was disappointment. I shot my boyfriend a quick look of understanding, and we silently decided to continue with the tour, so as not to escalate the situation. I casually joked about the cameras, saying it was nice to have one to videotape myself for auditions. They laughed nervously and went along with it. The roommate then brought us over to my room, which turned out to be a broom closet. It was impossible to fit a single bed in there. I seized the opportunity to leave, saying, "Oh, that's not too bad. I have a queen bed. It won't fit. Thank you for your time, though." As we stepped out onto the street and walked around the corner, we looked at each other in stunned silence, realizing how close we might have come to something much worse. Story 4. So this happened a few years ago, and I just recently remembered it. For a little background, I'm a 20-year-old female from Germany. When I was 17, I was in a long-distance relationship and was desperate for some extra cash, because I spent most of my pocket money on train tickets to see my boyfriend. So I put up an ad for a babysitter on the German equivalent of Craigslist. Soon I got a call. Not an hour after putting up the ad, I was greeted by the voice of a man. The conversation started off innocently enough, with him telling me that he had an 8-year-old and needed someone to watch him after school, as both him and his wife were working full-time. I expected him to ask me about my experience with kids or something to that effect, but instead he went on to tell me that his son could be a little difficult. I expect him to ask me about my experience with kids or something to that effect, but instead he went on to tell me that his son could be a little difficult. I thought to myself as he continued, "Would you hit him if he's being naughty?" He asked. I was taken aback by this question. I'm very against violence against children. Even spanking is child abuse in my eyes. I told the man that, and I'll do my best to find a non-violent way to deal with these problems. But what if he was hitting you? Would you hit back? He pressed. I replied with a firm no. At this point, I started to feel angry, as it dawned on me that this was obviously a common occurrence for the child to be hit. He kept on throwing scenarios at me, asking if I would discipline his son in that situation, and mentioned that his old babysitter apparently frequently spanked him. I eventually told him as politely as I could that if a parent chooses to use spanking as a form of punishment, that was their business, but as a babysitter, I had no right to hit a child. He was silent for a while, then asked me if I would shave his son. I honestly don't remember what my exact response was, but it definitely wasn't yes. He went on explaining that his son was supposed to take a bath every Thursday, and that he hated taking baths. He wanted to know how I would make him get in the bathtub, and if I would strip him naked. At this point, red flags came up. I dodged the question as best I could, saying something to the effect of things like this are a parent's job, not babysitters, and that the parents would make him take his bath in the evening after work. But he kept pressing, asking things of an obscene nature, if I'd seen some naked, etc. I just kept saying no until he eventually hung up. I removed my phone number from the ad immediately and told people to contact me via email instead. I also got a new phone number for reasons unrelated to this unsettling phone call. So luckily I never heard from him again. I just hope his son, if he actually had one, which I honestly doubt, is okay. Story 5. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was a really nice 2-bedroom apartment, cheap to rent and close to campus, the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29, called Beth. She was tall and wired, with jet black hair and heavy makeup. She seemed really nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, I recalled. And that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout the dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off and said, "Thanks, I look nothing like him," so it didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I'd seen her room yet. I continued. I said no, so she took me there. At first, I was kind of hesitant. The walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf, and she even had printouts of him everywhere. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it, nor would I. It was creepy. The whole night, she had been saying how I looked like him, so it was now obvious to me that she was obsessed with him. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much, I reflected. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room, spending the whole night in there. She had this creepy, high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls at night, wondering what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out for like 2 minutes, slurring her words, so I suspected that she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything and just stand in the hallway, watching me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised, saying, "Hello, Beth." Then there would be a long, awkward pause, and she'd let out this high-pitched giggle. It was very uncomfortable being around her. She gave me chills. So one night I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I continued. I came out of my bedroom, and the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the door, her face against it. I could now see that she was turning to look back and forth, over and over again. Every time she turned, she muttered my name. Seeing her stand in the dark, mumbling my name, really freaks me out. And it doesn't help that she kind of looks like the bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly go back to my room and try to sleep. So one night, I'm watching Gladiator, I recounted, and she stumbled out of her room and turned the living room lights on, forcing me to pause the movie, which was really annoying. She then said to me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy setting, to say the least. Now, 10 minutes into her story, she was so riled up, I continued. She began screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the police, and she wasn't listening to me when I said to her to lower the volume. One thing that really freaked me out, I added, was when, in the midst of her fit, she said she'd slit his throat. That was a big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger. It became more and more worrying to me. Disturbing, to say the least. After a few more minutes, she thanked me for listening and started doing her giggle, I recounted. I got out of there pretty quick, went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the home with her. What's worse is that there's no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front to barricade. Now, there's this one time that I wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor, I recalled. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my lights, shouting at her to stop. I could see through the opening of the door. She was so drunk, having this intense, crazy look in her eyes. I pushed her door closed, yelling at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I remembered. I saw one of her steak knives on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over. All I could think about was her saying that she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex's actions. I had enough now, I concluded. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. Right as I got out, I turned it on, and to my shock, I received at least 40 text messages in the last 2 hours. That was just insane from Hi. How are you to I hate you? It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wondered if I hadn't set my dresser in front of the door, would she have quietly come into my room to murder me? Story 6. I am a 25-year-old guy. This happened 4 years ago and is still unresolved, if you'd like to call it that. This Friday night, I had gotten off work around 5:30 p.m. and was ready to make plans for the night. I was recently single, and I've been asking readers not to judge. I had some making up to do for lost time. I had met a few new girls, but most of the single girls I knew didn't think my breakup was real, because my girlfriend and I had been together for such a long time. As someone who tends to stay away from clubs, I began exploring online dating. While at home, I started looking at girls near me on POV. For some reason that night I really wanted to be in the company of a woman, and the hour I'd spent with no suitable response began to wear my patience down. I eventually looked on Craigslist and posted personal ads. Now, I know crazy. This is not the best place to meet people, but at this point, I was thinking with the other head, if you know what I mean. After I was out for an hour or two, when I returned, I noticed I had some responses to my ad, mostly spam, obvious escorts, and a catfish. I may have been desperate, but I wanted someone that I felt comfortable with on a friend and personal level. After weeding through, I saw one response that looked legit. I could tell she had read the ad, and it was an actual written response. She even included a few pics, all of which she looked normal. She was cute but didn't look like a model from a magazine or anything like that. They just looked like selfies she took herself. In hindsight, there was something about this, though I didn't catch it at first, which is important to the rest of the story. I use a dummy email for Craigslist, and I've set it up so that pictures don't download automatically. I learned my lesson after posting an ad for a table and getting a dick pic. However, these pics showed up right away as soon as I opened the email. This will tie in later. After some back and forth, I decided I'll come over. She gives me the address, and I see that it's an apartment building. Even better, as I'm always thinking of safety. I didn't want to go inside an actual home. I get there and email that I'm outside, and she tells me to walk to the courtyard so she can make sure that I am who I say I am. Understandable. I said I was 5'11", and it would be scaring her, and if so, I'm 6 foot. Fire was out there. After saying that it was truly me, she says she has to tell me something. I'm thinking the worst here and assault the thing of what could be. Then she tells me I'm really a man, I'm sorry. Now I'm pissed, but that washes over immediately as I feel played. I'm prepared to take my loss and quickly head back to my car. When I got my remote, he tells me to come in and that he can give me money or cook or have drinks or whatever. He sounds like he just really wants company. I'm sorry, but I'm just not chilling with some guy. He then sends me the last email that simply says $200 for 2 hours, no touching, no sex. He catches my eye, and I walk up to his door. Stupid, I know. But at this point, I'm thinking I'll just take his $200. Maybe knock over some of these things for tricking me and just leave. My better judgment gets the best of me, thankfully, and I'm about 5 feet from his door when I turn around and leave. I decided this was a sign that I needed to just stay at home for the night. I stopped at 7 to 11 to grab a beer. I get back in my car and start reading through Facebook. All of a sudden, I get a Facebook message from someone I didn't know, who I can tell was a fake profile saying, "Sorry, can you please come back? I get upset at the nerve of this guy." And then a chill runs down my spine. How on earth did you get my personal Facebook? I used a fake email that has no ties whatsoever to my real name. I message him back. Leave me alone. I apologize, but I'm not interested. The manifest to me was saying something along the lines of "you should listen," then said my name and my job. It was listed on my Facebook, but it was my first ever camp job before college, so it really didn't mean much. I told the man to stop and not come back with some help. I didn't get any more messages after that. I deleted the Facebook messages, deleted my email account, and went home. 2 days later, I'm on my computer when, again, I get a Facebook message from the guy that says, "Black shirt, I don't even begin to give the time of day to decipher that," and delete the message. Or boogeyman. 10 seconds later, I come to the realization that I'm wearing a black V-neck. I look at the window as if I'm suspecting someone to be peering inside, when I remember I'm on the 11th floor of a high-rise building. There's only one way in, and the door has a strong deadbolt lock. Whenever I come in, I quickly close and lock the door due to my paranoia, so I knew there was nobody physically in my place with me. I'm startled but brush it off as a scare tactic. I bet like 6 in 10 guys right now are wearing a black t-shirt. The man just seemed like a lonely troll, and I'm sure he was doing this to everyone who felt trapped in his Craigslist scheme. I closed my computer down and went on with my day. 2 days later, I'm sitting back on my computer as usual when, once again, the guy messages me. I already know it's going to be some nonsense, so I'm going to do a quick read and delete things so he can't see that I've read it. I see the partial message that says, "Black and red robe." I literally scoop back in my chair and stare at my computer. Right behind me, I'm sure reflecting in my screen if the light would have hit it correctly, was a poster with black water and red land, a friend boy from you, because it was different. I understood it right away. This man could access my webcam. I then thought back to my original email. He penetrated through my firewall, and he somehow tied my fake email to my real name. I'm pretty good with computers, but I'm the first to take note when I'm dealing with someone who's a genius with computers. This man gave off every vibe that he knew what he was doing in the computing world, and maybe even the hacking world. I slam it shut and pace around the room, mumbling to myself that I'd been so careless to get in a position like this. I run to a drawer and scramble for the black electrical tape. I find some and cover the cam. I am officially freaked out at this point. I'm not a tough guy by any means, and I hold my own in most situations, but I felt out of control. I delete my Facebook and every social media account as well. I spend the next 10 minutes prioritizing my online presence and cleaning up my computer. I keep the tape on and try to get on with my week. 2 days later, I come home from work around 6 p.m. I come in and close the door and greet my peers. I see a white piece of paper that was slid under my door. This usually meant maintenance had a project going on, or we were late on rent, or the elevators were broken. We got a lot of those elevator letters. I pick it up and place it on the table as I get my dog to stop jumping on me and put my bag down. I pick up the note and it says blue doormat. To give you some background, during my drunken escapade, my ex and I bought a bright blue doormat that we were both 100% sure was green. I would match the green coffee outside our door. We then sobered up the next morning and we realized how off we were and decided to keep it as a joke. This man had been inside my building and outside my door. The thing is, it was a big building. You would need to know the building number, address, floor number, and apartment number. Matak wasn't going crazy. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. I swung the main closet doors open, nothing. I ran into the bedroom and swung the closet doors open again, nothing. I raced to the bathroom and opened the shower curtain, nothing. The man had not been inside, but he had been close enough. I'm not the type to call the police, but I felt like I didn't know what to do. After sleeping on it, I called 911 the next day and asked for a non-emergency. After holding, I was connected to a lady and told her what was going on. She said she couldn't do anything but give me the number of the police or the city where the man lived. I called and spoke to an officer and basically told him that I'm not trying to press charges or anything, but can someone please go over there and scare him or something? I could tell the cops wanted nothing to do with me, but I kept his ear, probably because he could hear a rational young man basically pleading with him to help. He said he would send someone out there. I got a call a few hours later from the station. The cop I spoke to before said that there was no answer at the door. He told me that he went to speak with the leasing officer and the sales manager, and the only person who lived there was an old lady who had been there forever. I froze for a moment. The guy wasn't even at that apartment when I came there. I started to think, was he in a different apartment? Was he waiting in a car behind a tree or somewhere in the courtyard? I personally think he was somewhere inside a neighboring apartment just watching. However, I had never felt so careless. My gut told me to reactivate my account and just wait for another message. I did that for a month or so before shutting it down for good before making another one. I just felt more comfortable that way. I never had another encounter, and I've since moved and gotten a new computer. I got the courage to go up to that apartment twice. The first time I didn't get a response when I knocked. The second time I was greeted by an older lady, similar to what the cop told me. I told her what happened, and she assured me she had no sons or nephews or anything like that. She left me with a lecture, telling me to be safe. That was 4 years ago. I'm 25 now, and to look back at my 21-year-old self, I would never even consider meeting someone online like that now. Please, if it seems sketchy, it is sketchy. Story 7. This happened last year around this season while I was broke, struggling to make ends meet. I just moved out and didn't want to resort to going back to my mom and dad's house. Anyway, I was so desperately trying to find anything. I went to Craigslist for caregiver housekeeping type gigs to make some quick cash while I was searching for a full-time position. I knew I wasn't going to be there too long. How bad could it be? Right now? After responding to several, I got to buy it back from a man who advertised as being disabled, who needed help with his morning routine and whatnot. Now, I knew it could be difficult for some, and I felt a bit bad. After chatting on the phone and coming to the conclusion he was nice and normal, I proceeded to head over to his townhouse late one night to help him with his nighttime routine. He lived a bit out of the way for me, but I was so desperate and didn't write, and he even said to me that I could spend the night there if I needed. Once I got there, I found he was a decent lucky man in his late 40s, early 40s with a cane. He paid me $200 up front for the expected nighttime and morning routine the next day. He explained to me that his ex-military, coming back from surgery recently, things started to get weird when he offered me some wine. Common sense on how cute he thinks I am. Now, honestly, I should have seen this as a big red flag. He then led me to his bedroom where he got undressed for his evening shower. I was horrified that he was turned on wanting me to love him up. He then said, "Do I want to take my clothes off for him?" I said no. Now, after giving him a normal shower, he got out and set his head into bed, but didn't want to wear any clothes. The guest room where I was to stay, he was right next to his pillow. I was tired. I was very on edge. My gut instincts were telling me to get the hell out of there. The issue was that we're on a 3-story townhouse and on the top floor, and that he had installed baby gates on each floor so his cat couldn't run away. Also, he turned off all the lights on the lower floors, so to get out, I'd have to pass his room. And I'll quietly arrange my stuff and my past when I hear his TV blaring in some way horror. I saw him walk swiftly to his bathroom without his cane. I realized no, he's not disabled, since before he said he could not walk without. As quickly and quietly as occurred, I fled and ran like hell out to the room while he's in the bathroom. I now jump like I'm in an Olympic sprinter, getting out of there as quick as I can over the cat gates to the dock stairs. There was a fro from the front door. I hear his house alarm going off and gets into my car as quick as lightning, heart beating like crazy. He then calls me immediately. I sweat out of there and was terrified. Who knows what could have happened if I stayed overnight. I'm glad I didn't have to find out. Story 8. I am a mobile user, so you know the drill. This may get a bit long. This happened 4 years ago when I was in college. It was around midnight at a friend's parents' house who were very laid back, and that's an understatement. Myself, my cousin, and his girlfriend at the time, Holly, were snoozing in the living room. A phone goes off and wakes up Ted, and I see it's Holly's phone. Holly is in a deep pot-induced coma, so we ignore it and go back to sleep. The phone continues to ring, so Ted finally answers it. They've never been shy of looking into each other's phones, but don't abuse the privilege. He says hello a few times before a mouthful Holly. Ted immediately hung up and got suspicious as to why Mal was calling Holly at 2 a.m. He goes through her phone while I'm in the bathroom. While washing my hand, Ted knocks on the door saying, "Hey, we need to talk home now." So I dry my hands and he wakes her up, and we get in my car and drive off to her part of town. Holly keeps asking Ted what's wrong and what's going on. Ted finally blew up about the call, emails he found in a phone proving she had been prostituting herself on Craigslist again and again, and that he was done. I was quiet as crypt keeper as she's bawling her eyes out and losing share, trying to explain. We wait to get to her house before he can even fully stop the car, and he tells her to get the fuck out and to lose his number. She goes inside in a snotty mess, and we leave. When we pull up to his house, we sit inside my car for a while talking about what just happened, and given him time to then and tell me that this isn't the first time that they'll have this. Out of nowhere, a black town car pulls up right next to us. And Ted says, "Our crap 3 people, 2 men, and an older woman get our hands around the car. I can see that the youngster of the 2 men has a firearm." The woman goes to Ted's side yelling for him to get out of the car and take his arms within like a man. I start freaking out asking who these people are, and the woman starts trying to yank my doors open and punch my windows. Ted says it's Holly's mom, her stepdad, and her cousin. When he's one-punched the window for the 3rd time, I noticed his cousin lined his hand near his firearm. So Flight 1 and I immediately put the car in reverse and drove back down the street to get away. I saved into a person's yard. I've since apologized and compensated for the damage, and as we took off, I saw them run into their car and give chase. I had never been so panicked in my life. We were flying down regular roadways at 50 or 60 miles an hour. I'm running red lights, taking last-year turns. I must have burned all the treads off my tires because my car skidded a good handful of times. They chased us for 22 minutes, while the whole time I was praying, where the fuck is a cop when you need one? When we got to a quiet neighborhood I knew well, we turned down a street heavily covered in trees, and Ted said, "Tony likes often stay on the brake, I do as I'm told," and rode down the street slowly. I stared into my rearview mirror, and we saw them drive across a road that we were on very slowly, but thankfully they didn't see us. When we were sure we lost them, I paused and started yelling at Ted Olson while they were chasing us and what was going on. As I'm having my panic attack, his phone rings and it's his mom. He answers, and they say they want me to talk and get Holly's phone back. In the heat of everything, idiot Ted forgot to give Holly her phone back. I said I'm not meeting them without a cop present, so we tell them to meet at a local gas station that we know cops monitor frequently. When we finally get there, thankfully there was an officer on duty. They arrived 2 minutes after we did, and Ted got out to deal with them in plain view of the cop and the camera outside the gas station. I noticed the cousin was not in the car when they pulled up. I couldn't make out everything that was said, but Ted handed her the phone. They talked for about 15 minutes with her flailing her hands, getting in his face, and even pointing at the cop, as if she was going to say something to them. When it was over, he got back, and we drove off. So when we dropped Holly off, she walked into her house crying. Her family immediately asked what was wrong, and Holly wouldn't say anything, just cried. So in their minds, they jumped to conclusions that had hit her. She didn't even try and correct them. When he tried to show her mom her ways, she completely swept it under the rug and tried to make him the reason for all. I told him he was better off without that crazy, and he dodged a bullet. The next week was spring break, so we took a much-needed trip to Colorado. Story 9. Before I begin the story, I just want to say that I live in a big college town, so posting or responding to Craigslist ads looking for roommates is completely normal. This takes place last night. My best friend Katie was looking for a roommate as she lived with her mom and wanted to move out as soon as possible. She posted an ad on Craigslist looking for a one-bedroom or a room for rent with roommates. A guy named RH20 texted her, telling her that he and his girlfriend were about to have a room for rent in their townhome as their other roommate was moving out. Excited and surprised at the affordability, Katie agreed to meet him and check the place out. Since she had no idea, she brought a good friend, Diamond, with her. They met this guy and his neighbors, and Katie decided that she really liked him and the place but needed to get another opinion. Later that night, Katie called me and asked me if I wanted to go back over there to meet the guy. She told me how cool he was and how much we all had in common. I agreed. I texted my boyfriend, who was at work at the time, to let him know where I'd be just in case. We arrived at the apartment, and I was instantly drawn to this guy. He had great energy and was overall sweet. His girlfriend, who worked nearby, came over for a few minutes on her break. She was very sweet, and I recognized her as one of my friend's sisters. She went back to work, and we continued talking and laughing with the guy and his neighbors. The guy made a comment about him and his girlfriend and how they used to be into orgies and things like that. Katie and I, however, are not into such things. We left after a bit, and I went to pick up my boyfriend from work the next night. Okay, he asked me if I wanted to go back over there and hang out, have a few drinks, and get to know his girlfriend a little better. Once again, I agreed. It was just the four of us this time, and we all took in a few shots and had a couple of mixed drinks. His girlfriend has anxiety, like 80, and ended up having a horrible drunken panic attack. We left shortly after as it was a bit much to handle, and we didn't think much of it. Now, Katie's favorite movie is Harry Potter. They invited us over on Saturday night to have a Harry Potter marathon. Unfortunately, my boyfriend was at work and couldn't attend. Everything was completely normal up until he put the second movie in. Katie and I were sitting on the floor, and his girlfriend came down to join us for some girl talk and whatnot. Later, he came down to join us. Everything was normal for all of 10 seconds when he decided to lie across all three of us. He started groping Katie, and she started groping me. Katie and I made it clear that this was not okay. Being pinned under the girlfriend, I was not able to get up as she was much bigger than me. She began to put her hands down my pants and insert her fingers. As I tried to get up and told her to stop, he got behind his girlfriend and began to have intercourse with her. Katie and I tried to stand up, and he finally said, "Oh, "You're not comfortable with this." We told him that we were never comfortable with this and that we needed to leave. He laid down next to us, and as we gathered our things, he began masturbating. All the while, his girlfriend was trying to pull us back down and tackled Katie, beginning to grope her. We finally broke free and ran out of the house. The next day, we filed a police report for sexual assault, and we're still waiting to hear from the detective. The moral of the story is don't look for roommates on Craigslist, and don't trust people just because they seem nice. Story 10. I'm always on Craigslist looking for a Bluetooth speaker. I found one that wasn't too far away from me. It was nice and modern and looked really good. I had to meet up at this guy's house to get it. His house is in a really weird location, deep in the woods. As I'm approaching, I get a really weird feeling about what's going to happen there. It just doesn't like the right place, and the house seems abandoned. I can see some of the windows are boarded up. I have a bad feeling about this. But a good deal is a good deal, right? So I make my way there, and I'm greeted by a giant of a man. He looks so strange, like he hasn't washed for ages. Not the kind of person you'd expect to see selling a Bluetooth speaker. Anyway, I get chatting to him and he seems okay. Eventually I get the feeling that something's a little off about him. He can't wait to show me the basement. Now I say that's fine, I just need to see the speaker. He tells me to wait while he brings it out. So I'm waiting in his living room, and he places it on the table. I say I have to go back to my car. He tries to stop me, saying, "Wait 1 second, I was ready to drive off for real. He's got this speaker, and I do need one." So I quickly head back. As I do so, I hear that he's playing these weird screaming sounds. Honestly, it sounded like somebody's being murdered. I said, "Are you watching a horror film while you're here?" He says. "Oh no, just playing some music then." Realizing why I said that, he says, "Oh yeah, I can't get it to turn off." As I look down, I see the speaker's not even on. With that, I bolted out of there like my life depended on it. I drove out of there quicker than I've ever driven before, terrified, on the phone to the police. They say they're going to send a unit down there to investigate. A few weeks later, I hear a follow-up from them. They checked out the place, and the old man was long gone, and there was nothing in the basement. Story 11. I really love Craigslist. I've estimated that I've met maybe 300 people from buying and selling stuff, who for the most part, everyone's nice and harmless. However, I did fall into 2 creeps who made me rethink me and strangers online again. Now I was in my early 20s when this happened, and I'm a female. I see Fasten and Nyan Mustang with my parents for Christmas holidays in a small town in Florida. Going through my childhood room, cleaning out the closet, finding a giant CD holder full of maybe 100 really bad CDs. It's 21st century now, no one uses them. I figure I'll try and sell the CDs on Craigslist. I put up for less than 100 CDs from the late 90s and early mid-2000s for $45. Next day, I get an email from a guy named John around 2 p.m. He says he's in town and that he wants CDs. He says he can pick them up after dinner around 8. I email him back my address and number, telling him to text or call when he's on his way. 8 p.m. comes and goes. I figure I've been stood up, which often happens on Craigslist, no big deal. But that works for a liquor distribution company and would often do demonstration nights at restaurants and bars and will come home at bar close in time. This night he gets home at around 3 a.m. I'm in college and a total night owl, so I'm still up eating junk food, surfing the web, watching horror films. I hear a cough a lot. Look out the window and see him sitting in his car eats, and he often stops at Taco Bell on his way home. And he's in his car, so my mom doesn't know he's cheating on his diet. Maybe 10 minutes later, my dad comes in and shouts my name. "There's someone here to see you. Can you please tell me why a strange man is showing up at 3 a.m.? I'm confused by this and go downstairs. I walk outside with my dad. And this guy who's maybe mid-40s gets out of his car. He says he's a Craigslist guy. You wanted to find my CDs. But that goes back in. I tell the guy it's really late to be stopping by, especially without letting me know first. However, since I'm awake, I go grab the CDs. He then proceeds to drone on and on about why he's buying them. He says he's engaged to a woman he loves very much, and he wants to make her happy. He said last week someone broke into her car, took all the CDs, and upset her. Only wanted to make his heart to her. You looked on Craigslist and found my list in and was excited because I had a bunch of the CDs she used to have. Weird thing is, I didn't list any of the artists and bands because I was lazy. Anyway, he was doing it for a surprise. He said he was staying with his future in-laws somewhere near Via and their family barbecue run really late, which is why he never made it to Ahat. By this point, I've lost interest and say something along the lines of next time. Maybe you should call or text though, or hand the CDs. He gives me the cash, and I go back inside. 3 days later, I start getting texts from an unknown number. Hey, I don't know my way around town. Care to give me a tour? I could use a massage. Where can I get a massage in this town? You're Asian, do you do massages? Would you take $50 for an hour happy ending? I finally reply, who is this? He said, oh sorry, I bought the CDs from you the other day. I didn't respond, obviously showing my friends, and we laugh. It's off the kneecap, more texts. I still have your dress. I'm at the Bank of America near your neighborhood. Or $40 vape, 3 minutes away. Then swearing at me, asking why I'm being ignored. I immediately ran downstairs to tell my mom and dad. It's nighttime, so we shut off all the lights outside and inside my home. My mom, this brother, and I went to my parents' room in the back of the home. My dad hid behind the curtains of the front bay window with a shovel in his hands. A few minutes later, I heard him run down from the front hallway, flinging the door open and running outside. We can then hear lots of faint chatter. Suddenly, my dad rushes back into the bedroom. By that time, my dad came back in with his shovel, his face red and hands shaking. Apparently, the guy came driving down our street really slowly. My dad recognized his car and went running outside, the shovel yelling at the guy. He peels off. Never came back or texted me again. Now for the second guy. This happened when I was moving from Florida to DC, and I was going to load up my car with as many things as I could. However, I lived on the 3rd floor, plus a bit of a walk from my assigned parking spot. So I figured I could use some help. I posted an ad on Craigslist. I said I was looking for someone to help me with some heavy items like the TV and desk, etc. And so my car less than an hour's work. And I said I'd take $45. I gave my very first responder my Nan for an address, and he shows up. He was probably 150 pounds of pure fat. The sweat and smell coming off the guy was nauseating. I didn't care as long as he was getting the job done. While he was causing heavy stuff, I was loading lots of things. Whenever I go upstairs to grab another load, he'd hurry off to me so he could walk up behind me. I had the door for a sofa, and so he didn't have to worry about kneeling to unlock the door. And I think when he followed me up the stairs, he'd make weird comments. Eventually, everything loaded properly, save for some sweat smears on the staff. I pay him when he drives off. I go back in my place and finish loading and cleaning. I go out maybe 45 minutes later for another load in my car, and I see his truck is back. Parked across the street from my son is sitting in the driver's seat staring at me. When he sees me, he looks away. I look over to the window and knock. He rolls it down and I say, "Do you need any help?" I was confused as to why he returned. I was really confused why he hadn't left the area or even. He didn't say anything. He just rolled his window back off and drove off. All right, weird. Of course, 5 minutes later, my phone starts blowing up. I don't recognize the number, so I don't answer. Then the texts come in, really weird ones about meeting ups and doing weird stuff. I get this thing can feed in, it's a Craigslist guy. He had never called me about the job when I gave him my number, so I didn't know what his number was. He starts describing the clothes I was wearing from the day and how much he wanted. I was scared no. He started dialing my number over and over again. I didn't know how to do the block number thing for my provider at all, so I had to turn my phone off. Later, I was with my girlfriend grabbing a bite and turned my phone back on again of a text from him, which is really weird again. The Craigslist creep then starts blowing up my phone again. Ended up being able to block him. Since then, I've never bought stuff on Craigslist again. Story 12. Not too long ago, I put a post on Craigslist stating to either sell or trade my fish tank for a smaller one. I put my phone number as a contact source and asked for text only. After a couple of hours, I get a text from someone who's willing to trade. We agreed to meet up at Walmart in a couple of days when we're both free to do our trade. During those days, the guy kept on texting me, involved in small talk. He asked me about my name, where I was, etc. And me being foolish, I answered his questions. I use Craigslist often. I never really had a bad experience with anyone, so I never really thought anything about this guy. I just saw him as too friendly. I told this guy what car I drove and what college I went to, again never ready, responding, stopping at any personal information he wanted. When the day came to meet this guy, he told me he could only meet after 7 p.m. I thought that was odd, but agreed to meet him anyways, since my 4 fish had been stuck in a 5-gallon jug. So my boyfriend and I drove to Walmart at 10:15 and got there in 20 minutes. The guy texted me and said he was already there in a yellow Camaro. I replied, saying we're in a gray, then our call. And he texted me and said, "Who is we?" At that moment, I realized something's really off about this guy. I replied by saying my husband and I never responded though. My boyfriend and I went around the parking lot a couple of times looking for a yellow Camaro but never found it. I tried calling the guy and he ignored my calls. We decided it's best just to leave. And I don't know what would have happened had I went there all by myself or even with my boyfriend there. Story 13. A few years ago, my partner and I moved from the East Coast to the Pacific Northwest. We didn't know anyone here. We just saved up a decent chunk of money and jumped on a plane. I was excited. We certainly hadn't regretted making the decision. The plan was to stay at some cheap hotels and hostels until we could find work in an apartment, and finding work was actually easy. We had new jobs within a week of getting off the plane. Finding somewhere to live, though, was a nightmare. Everywhere we looked had incredibly strict requirements with credit scores and minimum household income. We tried more legitimate sites at first, but after months of hopping around to different hotels, motels, Airbnb places, we had become so desperate that we went to Craigslist. So one day I'm desperately scouring Craigslist for rooms when I come across one that seemed a bit weird. The post said that he had a very large home in a very nice neighborhood and that he wanted to rent out a 500 square foot room for $600 a month, which in this city is suspiciously cheap. He also wrote it in a rambling, saucer way. It was almost half fact and half open that. Now obviously, if we weren't so desperate, we would never consider contacting the man. But we felt that we were playing a good risk of running out of money before we could find somewhere. So we gave him a call on the phone. He sounded relatively normal. He actually suggested that we meet up in a public place to talk about the first room. We arranged to meet in a restaurant near the hostel we were staying at. He showed up late, looking surprised to actually see us there. He sat down, speaking for a long time. I say he spoke rather than we talked because he rambled nonstop about himself, how he was persecuted by everyone in the city. He claimed to be an artist and collector, and between him repeating himself many times about how local people do not understand his passion. He also tells us that the place he's going to rent us has his personal collection. At one point, he stops talking abruptly and runs into the restroom. We took this opportunity to discuss the situation. We knew at this point he was probably a crazy person, but the threat of homelessness was looming. So we agreed that we should at least see it rather than give way to his eccentric nature. He came back to the table sweaty and flustered. Before we could say anything, he said, "I'll only show you now." We were surprised by this, though we had just discussed seeing the place. I said to him to text me the address, and we would take public transport to meet him there. He insisted that he drove us there since we didn't have a car. Now we obviously hesitated to get into his truck. It was obvious even to him, I think, for the previously mentioned desperation was still a thing, and we're pretty sure he wasn't going to try and hurt us. We were right, but it was a bad decision. So we crammed in the front seat of his tiny, rusted pickup truck. My partner pressed up against the door, and I was uncomfortably close to the driver. As he continued his spiel about the city and how it had gone downhill, mentioning everyone he used to know, we'd hang out. At one point, I whispered to my partner to get ready for a possible truck and roll situation. He saw me whispering but couldn't hear me over the rumbling wind, and he said something about us being romantic together, reminding him of his youth. We eventually arrived at his home, and if we'd been technically honest up to this point, his neighborhood was decent looking. His home was a large ranch style. I noticed out loud that he had bars on all the windows and several locks on his front door. He said his collection is very valuable to him, and he just wanted to protect it from thieves. Once he let us in, I made a point of urging him ahead so that he couldn't get a chance to get behind us. We very quickly noticed 3 things: his art collection and the smell. The man's method of art, which he was very proud of, involved taking lots of childlike things like baby dolls, stuffed animals, and whatnot, and attaching weird things to them. There was so much weird stuff everywhere. There was a baby doll hanging off a rope like it had been hung there. Now, his weird stuff was everywhere. He was definitely not concerned about cleanliness. The place reeked of mildew. The carpet looked as though it hadn't been vacuumed in forever. He then said he loves cast iron pans so you don't have to wash them. This cluttered pans everywhere, with dodgy food on a few. We stayed behind him, mostly silent, as he stopped every now and then to point out his favorite art pieces and repeat the tale, leading us to the room that was full of his favorite stuff, by enough to get people to move out for us. He opens the door and said, "Voila." I don't doubt the room. As we walk around, every part of it has more issues, with his collection everywhere, hanging from the ceiling. Up to this point, we've done our best to try not to overreact to the situation, afraid he's going to snap if we do. I start to notice after a while he was getting disappointed. We're not reacting. My guess is he really expects people to be shocked by this. We told him that the room looks big enough, and then we'd like to go back to hotel and think it over. Or he doesn't have much of a reaction to us saying this. When he thinks I'm not looking, he reaches for something counts of his pocket, tossing it through the doorway into the dark. I'm afraid it's his car keys. So I use the lights on my phone to peek in as we press that room. So we fall into the back of his truck, have a long, awkward drive back to the place we have been staying at. He was rambling so much and flustered now. He eventually passes a place that we're meant to stop. As soon as we get to a red light, we jump out and say thanks. This is fine. Great to me. Now over the next couple of days, he's constantly texting me. Did you like it? I said that we've declined. Thank you. It's a nice offer. He then said to me, you creeped out, and copy and pasted it multiple times. Now I'm not sure why he is being so polite. I simply blocked him and get on with my day. Story 14. So over the last 7 months, I've been working for someone I responded to on Craigslist. I'll just explain everything. I was searching the internet for some sorts of paying gig. I didn't really care what. Then I came across a post on Craigslist. I had refreshed the page, and there it was. Someone was looking for a first and to come by and feed their pets. I assumed they're out of town or something. So I contacted them and left my number for email. I responds immediately in the form of a cell phone call. The caller was a man who explained to me that he was moving out of town, and his parents had cats they wanted fed daily. I gave the man my name so he could run me forever think. In about 20 minutes, I'm hired. I went there the next morning to get all the instructions and whatnot. Meeting the man I'd spoken to on the phone. His name's Ben. Ben explained to me that he would no longer be able to care for his parents' cats, and that his parents needed to focus on themselves. Survive was being brought on to take care of that. The money would be left on the kitchen table at the end of every week. $200 just to feed some cats. I know, right? In addition, money for more cat food would be left for me as needed. Then, he told me the first thing in this I thought was strange. I was to come at exactly 10 every day and be gone by 10 a.m. And I was never, ever, under any circumstances to interact or speak to his parents when I'm in their home. They will be in their chairs in the living room, watching television, and to never disturb them. He said if any of that be a problem, to which I assured him is not. He then showed me the area in which he can't see it and where the food is kept. While not rude in the least, he was very adamant that I do not explore forever in the home, which I promised him wouldn't be a problem. He pushes me outside, showed me where the spare keys are, in case the doors are locked, but he told me that was very unlikely to happen, with that expressing his hope that I can be trusted one last time. And then shake hands with him. He now told me to be there at 10 a.m. every day starting tomorrow. If I'm ever unable to make a call, leave a message on their home phone. To which he gave me the number. I shook my head on my way. The next day comes, I went inside at exactly 10 a.m. I walked into the home, and immediately to my right were Ben's parents sitting in recliners facing away from me watching some kind of game show. I announced my presence, to which ignore her made my way to the kitchen. I feed the cats and left. The exact same scenario plays out countless times over the next few months. 10 a.m. hello, which is unreturned. Feed the cats and leave on Friday. Then I pick up the small stack of 20s from the table. Easy as hell. Then, if it's a wall, came one day, I was running late. I got home at 10 or 8, entering in and apologizing to Ben's parents being made, to which I do not get roughs once they just kept sitting in their chairs watching their game show. I went to the kitchen to feed the cats. Look at my phone, 1011. I walked towards the hole, towards the front of the door. When I reached the living room, I then jumped back in shock. Ben's parents are standing there, completely still, staring directly at me. I apologize for running late and get out of there, though unnerved. I go back the next day on time. Everything's fine. And a few more months went by. I have nothing strange. And then comes the last day I'm there. I get there at 10, no free, wasn't worried because I knew I could be out before 1010. The problem came when I was in the kitchen and heard someone whisper, "Help me." It startled me. I jumped, looking around for the source of the cry for help. I saw no one, but I heard it again. And then a third time I began looking around before realizing I was running behind. I look on my phone as 1010, now my heart sinks. As I look down the hallway, seeing Ben's parents for the first time in light, they are grossly looking very malnourished, essentially walking skeletons. "Sorry, do you need any help?" I ask. They just did their blocking the way to the front door. I said I'll take the back door, which was located in the kitchen. For when I went to open it, I found it required a key to open from the inside. Now panic sets in. I look behind me, and I can see that his parents are about half a foot away from the entrance of the kitchen. I have nowhere else to go, except for I assume was a door to a pantry. They had blank stares across their faces. Their eyes looks as though the life had been drained out of them long ago. In a last-ditch effort, I went through the door that I thought was a pantry and was instead met with a staircase lead into a basement with, of course, and a light. As soon as I opened the door, there was a harsh stench that washed out the other way's clean air. I carefully went down the stairs, looking for a window. They're all no shots. I happened to look upstairs. My parents were now standing next to each other at the top. It was truly horrifying. "I need help. Please send someone quick," I frantically yell into the phone. I get my phone, dial 911, not knowing what else to do. When I explained my situation, they said they'd send out a car immediately and to stay on the phone with them, or they connect me to the unit en route. I run into the dark face when using my phone as light. It didn't provide much illumination since I'm in the middle of a call facing off. There were racks of junk that lie in the basement. Step 3, separating into AIOs, I went down to check if any of the windows are possibly loose. Then I turned around, shining the lights in front of me. I'm now inches away from them. They had this horrible look on their faces. I screamed, running, tripping over something, sending my phone flying, and of course it's faced on. I can't find it. I run back up the stairs into the kitchen, looking back and seeing nothing but darkness, because I'm in too deep seeing the faces now. I ran down the hall to the front door thing in a tofu, and I screamed when I saw the cop standing right in front of me. He said if I was the one that called, as I pushed past him to get outside and told him I look in the window and see the parents sitting in their chairs watching their game show. "I need help. The people in there are not alive," I urgently informed the officer. I explained this time that the crazy old faithful trapped me in their house and were chasing me because I went into the parents and looked around while I sit in the cop car. He came in about 5 minutes later, our skin. "Are you sure that someone was chasing you?" I said, "Yes, absolutely, sir," to old people that lived there. He informed me that the people that lived there in the chairs had been dead for quite some time. I said, "What's the smell?" And then he said, "Another body down there in the basement." Backup shows up. I give my statements and explained how I'd been come in there every day for months and months to feed the cats. I told them everything. A few days later, I found out that it was Ben's body in the basement. Story 15. A few months ago, some scumbags broke into my apartment while I was at work. They rummaged through all my stuff, tearing apart my room. They took a bunch of stuff, including a bunch of cash I stored away, my Xbox One, a 14-inch flat screen, and a bunch of food from my pantry. I came home that night to find the apartment had been trashed. It looked like a cyclone had moved through my bedroom. Of course, I ended up calling the police, who came right over and investigated the apartment. "Hello, police?" "Someone broke into my apartment," I said as I dialed. The person smashed a window in my bedroom and crawled in. I live on the ground floor, so it would have been really easy for them. I gave the police a list of all the stuff that went missing, along with the serial numbers of electronics. Unfortunately, they didn't find any usable fingerprints or anything, and there were no cameras on that side of the building. I called the rental agency from my building about the window, but they told me they couldn't send somebody until the next morning. This was probably the worst weekend of my life. The very thought that someone came into my space and decided they wanted my stuff sickens me. Thieves, the worst kind of people. A couple of months went by, and there was no word on any of the stuff that got stolen. I expected that much. Police in my city are useless most of the time. I'd already gotten a new TV, so all I needed was a new Xbox. I did some thinking and decided that I wanted to buy a second-hand one, as I didn't want to spend another $400 on a new console. So I jumped on Craigslist and did some searching. Sure enough, I found a seller who wanted to sell his for $250 along with all his games and controllers. It was a pretty fantastic deal. The only issue was the guy lived in the next town over. On the other hand, I was getting real tired of not playing video games, so I gave him a call and inquired about the console. "Hey, I saw your ad for the Xbox. Is it still available? I asked. He told me his name was Sam. He seemed like a really cool guy, and he was even willing to hold it for me if I came the same day. I agreed. I jumped into my car 50 minutes later and drove 45 minutes to the next town. The town was very rural, and there were a lot of wooded areas. The house I was trying to find was way out there next to some old train tracks. I pulled up to the house, which was off a dirt road. It was a real piece of junk, run down and overgrown. The old white paint was almost all chipped away, and the guy had a massive pile of trash right in the front yard that was filled with a bunch of old junk like TV sets and radios. I was unsure if I even had the right house, so I walked up to the door and hesitantly knocked. There was a short wait before I heard someone shuffling on the other side of the door. It opened, and there stood a very thin-looking man with a bushy beard. "Are you Sam?" I asked. "Yeah. Are you here for the Xbox?" he replied. I nodded nervously as he flashed me a smile and invited me inside. I had a bad feeling like something wasn't right with this guy. His house was a disaster. Almost every piece of furniture was filled with junk and garbage, and it looked like his kitchen hadn't been cleaned in months. I knew right off the bat he was a hoarder. I was worried about being the awkward one, but this guy was about as awkward as one could get. When I think about it now, I feel like he was probably on the spectrum, but I couldn't be too sure. There was also a smell like something in his house was rotting away, like something dead. He led me into the hallway on the first floor and started toward a door that looked much newer than the others in the house. "It's right down there," he said. He pushed the door open to reveal stairs leading into a dimly lit basement. Alarm bells started going off in my head, and I knew that there was something seriously wrong. "I'll stay at the top of the stairs peering down," I said. Sam stood behind me, almost as if he wanted to make sure I couldn't escape. "Go on," I urged. "You first," he replied, his awkward smile now turned into a cold gaze. When I looked towards the basement, the eerie smile on his face had grown even stronger. As I listened closer, I could hear what sounded like millions of flies buzzing around down there. I turned and quickly pushed past him, sprinting down the hallway. He started to pursue, but then he stopped. I ran out the front door and back onto the dirt road, jumping into my car before speeding down the road as fast as I could go. Before driving off, I caught a glimpse of his smiling face in the front window of the house. I made it home safe, which is where I realized he had sent me a text message. "Thanks for stopping by," with a little winky face. The creepiness had only intensified after that, and I've since blocked his number. I thought about calling his town's local police, but after I calmed down, I realized that there was probably not much they could do about it anyway. Days later, I started getting weird phone calls, usually around the same time every time. This persisted for several weeks before I saw Sam's mugshot on the local news. I guess he lured another unlucky buyer to his house, and when the buyer refused to go down to the basement, Sam assaulted them with a knife. Luckily, the FBI managed to fight him off and escape. The police were called, and what they found upon searching his house was horrifying. The sick, twisted guy had been killing local dogs and piling them in his basement, where he could do weird experiments on the bodies. The thought of it made me sick to my stomach, knowing what potentially could have happened to me if I hadn't run. I don't know what happened to Sam, but I sure as hell hope he spends his days in a padded cell somewhere. Story 16. If there's one piece of advice I can give anyone, it's never take the cheap way out, no matter how good it seems. Some things about that decision will bite you one day. You might be lucky. It may only be a mosquito bite. If not, it can be like a shock. For me, I wasn't so lucky, obviously, or I wouldn't be writing this story. Now, a couple of months ago, I got in a very bad accident. My car got totaled, almost beyond recognition. My insurance company gave a decent amount for it, but the money was tight for me, and I needed a car fast. I went to every place I could and ended up on Craigslist for a deal. I kept looking for a deal I couldn't say no to. I needed a decent running car for cheap, but it also had to be reliable. All the sellers at the time were asking fair prices, too fair for me. I was about to give up for the night when I came across a deal I was looking for. So I fell on this guy, Rob. He was selling a 2001 Toyota Camry with 100,000 miles on it, claiming it runs smoothly for a good price. I contacted Robert, and he told me I could test drive it the next day. I took a taxi out there and gave the car a good drive. Now, let me tell you, it ran like it was brand new. No complaints at all. It seemed almost too good to be true. So when I got back, I asked Rob if the car had any issues, no matter how much I pressed. He said there's nothing wrong with it. He seemed genuine about it the whole time. I had the car for about a month without incident. Then one night, I was driving home from a long day's work. It's about 1 in the morning, so you can imagine the roads were desolate. I'm smoking a cigarette with my windows down when a chill ran down my spine. The light slowly turns green, and the sound of the engine mixes with the sound of the wind, making it almost inaudible. No cars were around, so I slam on my brakes, bringing my car to a complete stop. I wait a couple of seconds for maybe a noise or whisper, but nothing. No incidents occurred the rest of the night. The next 2 weeks go by without incident. I even forgot about it. Then, something else happened. It's pouring rain while I'm at work, and it's a very slow day. So my boss lets me smoke a cigarette in my car. When I get in my car, I got the same chill once again. Incidentally, I remembered my last experience. I sat there in complete silence, waiting for something to happen. About 30 seconds later, my car gets filled with the smell of freshly shot fireworks. It got so bad I began coughing, getting out of my car, and then running back inside. Now, the look on my face at the time must have been far from that of a normal one, because my boss came up to make sure everything was okay. I told him about the smell, and the only thing he could think was some of the kids might mess with my car. We went to check it out, and this time, the smell was gone. He said he would check the security cameras later. After an hour straight of thinking about what happened, I tried to give Robert a call. Unfortunately, he canceled his phone. A week later, I just got into an apartment to deliver a pizza. It's going pretty regular. The guy was kind, given a nice tip. I had a good conversation with him. I'm about to wrap things up and head out when I notice something in the parking lot that catches my attention. "Hey, you drove the Camry here, right?" "Yeah, why? What's up?" "I think there's something in your car." I looked at my car, and sure enough, I see a girl sitting in there with a shotgun. She had black hair and was very powerful. God, she's broke. Can call the cops for a few seconds. I thought I was going crazy, and I finally got a person to see it. Turns out it wasn't the case. When I was on the 3rd floor, the goal was looking forward while I was facing her side. I lost sight of her going down the 2nd floor, but I saw her again for a second. Let me tell you, I nearly fainted. She was staring directly at me. Her eyes weren't worse, though. They were normal-looking blue eyes, almost pretty, but with a very black iris around it. There was something wrong that I couldn't put my finger on. The next thing I know, I feel a tap on my shoulder, breaking my trance. It's a pizza delivery guy informing me the cops have been called. "Why am I standing there?" he asked. So I explained. We both looked at the car again, and she's gone. The police ended up coming. We filed a report. They did a quick search through my car to see if there were any signs of a break-in, but unfortunately there were none. Everything was where it should have been. It made no sense. The police said they'd check the cameras and inform me if they saw anything, but they still have not spoken to me. Over the next few weeks, I would hear the damn whispering again, but only when my car or something in my environment made a noise. At first, it's occasional, but by the 2nd week, it's almost every time. I can make out separate voices, a man and a woman. I still don't know what they're saying. That was until I made it home. A few minutes from my home, I got the chicken has come in. I knew it, ever so clear. No, then I hear a shot, so no, I felt its cobra from down my neck and my peripheral. I could see her reflection in my rearview mirror, wanting me to turn, waiting. She kept whispering those damn words in my ear, creating a layer of ice upon my neck. The longer she whispered, the more it felt like I was being pulled into her influence. Finally, I get home, run inside, and lock myself in my room. 5 signs think it's a mistake. If I were to look out my window, I could see my car, and then the whispering, I'm hearing this again. His free voice is not. They keep telling me to look at the car just one more time. Really quick, just for a second. Maybe? No, yes, maybe I should just look real quick. Not for a second, and then what harm could it do? Besides, I've seen one without the others. Story 17. If there's one piece of advice I can give anyone, it's never take the cheap way out, no matter how good it seems. Some think about that decision will bite you one day. You might be lucky it may only be a mosquito bite. If not, it can be like a shock for me. I wasn't so lucky, obviously, or I wouldn't be writing this story. Now, a couple of months ago, I got in a very bad accident. My car got totaled almost beyond recognition. My insurance company gave a decent amount for it, but the money was tight for me, and I needed a car fast. I went to every place I could but ended up on Craigslist for a day. I kept looking for a deal I couldn't say no to. I needed a decent running car for cheap, but it also had to be reliable. All the sellers at the time were asking fair prices too fair for me. I was about to give up for the night when I came across a deal I was looking for, so I fell on this guy Rob, who was selling a 2001 Toyota Camry with 100,000 miles on it. He said it runs smoothly for a good price. I contacted Robert, and he told me I could test drive it the next day. I took a taxi out there, gave the car a good drive. Now let me tell you, it ran like it was brand new, no complaints at all. It seemed almost too good to be true. So when I got back, I asked was the car new, and no matter how much I pressed, he said there's nothing wrong with it. He seemed genuine about it the whole time. I had the car for about a month without incident. Then, one night, I was driving home from a long day's work. It's about 1 a.m, so you can imagine the roads were desolate. I'm smoking a cigarette with my windows down, and the wind is flying into the car. I remember being exhausted. I stopped at a red light, and a chill ran down my spine. The light slowly turns green. The sound of the engine mixed with the sound of the wind made it almost inaudible. No cars were around, so I slam on my brakes, bringing my car to a complete stop, waiting a couple of seconds for maybe a noise or anything, but nothing. No incident occurred the rest of the night. The next 2 weeks go by without incident. I even forgot about it. Then something else happened. It's pouring rain while I'm at work, and it's a very slow day. So my boss lets me smoke a cigarette in my car. When I get in my car, I got the same chill once again. Incidentally, I remembered my last experience. I sat there in complete silence waiting for something to happen. About 30 seconds later, my car got filled with the smell of freshly shot fireworks. It got so bad I began coughing, getting out of my car, and then running back inside. Now, the look on my face at the time must have been far from that of a normal one, because my boss came up to make sure everything was okay. I told him about the smell, and the only thing he could think was some of the kids might mess with my car. We went to check it out this time, and the smell was gone. He said he would check the security cameras later. Whatever it was, I tried blowing it off again, but this time I couldn't find a reason why it's for the sensation. After an hour straight of thinking about what happened, I tried to give Robert a call. Unfortunately, he canceled his phone. A week later, I just got into an apartment to deliver a pizza. It's going pretty regular. The guy was kind, gave a nice tip. I had a good conversation with him. I'm about to wrap things up and head out when I notice something in the parking lot that catches my attention. Hey, you drove the Camry here, right? Yeah, why? What's up? I think there's something in your car. I looked at my car, and sure enough, I see a girl sitting in there with a shotgun. She had black hair and was very powerful. God, she's broke. Can call the cops. For a few seconds, I thought I was losing my mind. And when I finally got a person to see it, it turns out that wasn't the case. When I was on the 3rd floor, the girl was looking forward while I was facing her side. I lost sight of her going down to the 2nd floor, but I saw her again for a second. Let me tell you, I nearly fainted. She was staring directly at me with her eyes from here to there, but that wasn't what was worse. It was her eyes. They were normal-looking blue eyes, almost pretty, but with a very black iris around it. There's something wrong with that, but I cannot put my finger on it. The next thing I know, I feel a tap on my shoulder, breaking my trance. It's a pizza delivery guy informing me the cops have been called. He said, "Why am I standing there?" So I explained. We both looked at the car again, and she's gone. The police ended up coming in. We filed a report. They did a quick search through my car to see if there were any signs of a break-in, and unfortunately there's none. Everything was where it should have been. It made no sense. The police said they'll check the cameras and inform me if they saw anything, but they still have not spoken to me. Over the next few weeks, I would hear the damn whispering again, but only when my car or something in my environment made a noise. That fast. It's occasional, but by the 2nd week, it's almost every time. I can make out separate voices, a man and a woman. I still don't know what they're saying. That was until I made it home. A few minutes from my home, I heard the whispering again. I knew it, ever so clear. No, then I hear a shot, so no, I felt this cold fear down my neck and my peripheral. I could see her reflection in my rearview mirror, wanting me to turn, waiting. She kept whispering those damn words in my ear, creating a layer of ice upon my neck. The longer she whispered, the more it felt like I was being pulled into her influence. Finally, I get home, run inside, and lock myself in my room. 5 signs think it's a mistake. If I were to look out my window, I could see my car. And then the whispering. I'm hearing it again. Is it free voice? It's not. They keep telling me to look at the car just one more time. Really quick, just for a second. Maybe? No. Yes. Maybe I should just look real quick. Not for a second. And then what harm could it do? Besides, I've seen one without the others. Story 18. About 3 years ago, I was obsessed with Craigslist, often going on there to find anything I needed. It seems more like an addiction now. I had just turned 17, and I was the only person in my homeroom class with a license, but no car. Of course, I went to Craigslist to find a car for a reasonable price. I was scrolling through different varieties of cars when I stumbled upon one in my price range. It was a 2008 Ford Explorer, only $3,000, and at the time, I wasn't entirely sure why it was so cheap, but I was naive. I clicked on the picture and read the description. It seemed harmless enough. I wanted to get rid of this car because my wife recently died. I only need $3,000 to give her a funeral she deserved. If you feel uncomfortable, I can bring my daughter with me, the ad read. Quickly, I looked at his contact information and messaged him. It didn't take long before I had a reply, and the day that we'd meet. I didn't ask for his daughter to come, since he didn't seem like a murderer. We agreed to meet the next day, and he only lived an hour away. The next day, he arrived quicker than I expected, and I had to hurry up and leave in my dad's car and started to drive to his house. When I got there, a chubby man in his early 30s greeted me. Our exchanges on anythings put me on edge, but he had an unnerving smile. After our exchanges, I called my dad to come and get his car. I got my new car and drove home. By the time I got back home, I was exhausted. I took a quick shower and fell onto my bed and dozed off soon after. About 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a car door slamming shut. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and jerked up. I looked out my window and saw a car in my driveway that wasn't mine or any of my family members. I saw a short, chubby figure getting out of the car with what looked like an axe. I was almost frozen, but I had the courage to grab my phone and dial 911. I had an 8-year-old sister, so I carried her sleeping body into my room and locked the door. The police weren't far from my house, so I guess they might have heard the sirens. He ran off because the cops never found anyone. I thought that was the end of the day, but I was so wrong. Yesterday evening, I was watching the news and I saw the police had caught a deadly serial killer in custody. He was responsible for killing 27 people from Craigslist. It was the same man I'd met. I had escaped death. They said his partner in crime, his daughter, had gotten away. I was looking for people to kill on Craigslist that her father hadn't killed. Story 19. I needed a new roommate quickly and eventually settled on this girl from Florida who was moving out to San Diego. She initially came off as a little goofy and naive over the phone, but in person, she was just strange. She had no sense of personal boundaries, would eat my food, use my laptop when I wasn't home, and would barge into my room when I had friends over, saying the weirdest stuff all in the first week. She did a ton of strange things when she lived with me. She started hanging out with a coworker from Subway, along with her coworker's boyfriend who just got out of jail and 4 of his friends. They really only came around because she'd buy stuff, and they laughed at dumb stuff she'd say, and I explained. She would always leave the window cracked because she lost her keys all the time, I added. Anyway, her friends actually broke into my home, stole my TV, laptop, ATV, in my small room, this wedding dress my aunt wanted for me off eBay, a bunch of DVDs, and my glasses. Now I called her, furious, and she's just getting home and called the police on me because I broke her laptop. Crazy. The cops came and pulled me aside and she seemed unstable. They suggested I don't use Craigslist for roommates anymore. I felt like we had our backs against the wall and were screaming at her when the cops walked in. I felt relieved when they saw that, but after talking to her for 5 minutes, they understood my frustration. The cops looked into what was stolen, and eventually I got my stuff back. I had to actually install cameras this time, which cost so much money. Taking the chance on Craigslist is one of my biggest regrets I have. Story 20. Once I was selling a couch on Craigslist. I really dropped the price low, but I just couldn't seem to get any attention for it whatsoever. In the end, I dropped it to a ridiculously low price, and finally I had someone show some interest. Now, over the phone, this person seemed weird, like they would stop mid-sentence, laugh a little, then continue. I thought, yeah, whatever. It's just somebody on drugs or something I recalled, always fearing in the back of my mind that they would be sober when they came around. So we agreed upon a date, and I was surprised when they actually showed up. No, I didn't see any car, and I think it really caught me off guard because I was sitting in the living room when they appeared. As I opened the door, I was met by a tall, weird-looking person. "You here for the couch?" I asked. They smiled and said yes. I recognized that weird laugh immediately. I showed them to the couch and said, "All right, you got the money." They went and sat on the couch, then let out the most maniacal laugh that I've ever heard in my life, got up and sprinted back into the forest. That was the last I ever heard of them, and the last time I ever went on Craigslist. Story 21. The weirdest thing that ever happened to me was when I was browsing Craigslist randomly one day, searching for a car. As I clicked on one, I found my computer was bugging out. It said an old truck in the description. The location was within 1 kilometer of me. You know, sometimes when you're on another page and you open a new one, and the picture from that page transfers over, I was thinking that's what happened, because it's a picture of me. "Ah, no one wants to buy me," I joked to myself as I clicked away. But then, there's a page listed of me for sale, full of details about me, pinpointing my exact address, what food I can't ever think. I was freaking the hell out and called the cops. The thing was, a month later it happened again. After this, I ended up moving away. I just couldn't stomach the fact that something this weird happened to me twice. None of my friends would ever do anything like that to me. I just pray someone I knew messing around. Nothing more serious. Story 22. I bought a truck off Craigslist once. Well, I say for almost everything seemed fine until we did the test drive. Now, I'm not kidding you, as we're going along. The brakes failed and there was nothing I could do to stop here. The handbrake wouldn't work here, I explained to the seller. We ended up having to both jump out the doors. The truck ended up rolling all the way down the hill and square into a tree. Story 23. I was desperate. I had recently been let go from my job as a CNA at the same place after 11 years. Not even a thank you. I was a young woman trying to make ends meet, and I thought I'd hit the jackpot when I first read the post on Craigslist. Okay, good caregiver needed for elderly couple, mostly for wife. Duties will include assisting with bathing and dressing, may also include some cooking and cleaning. Experience preferred along with a kind heart, and a work could be like attitude. Good starting pay offered. Other than the obvious spelling mistakes, the ad sounded perfect. I did wonder why they didn't ask for any references, but at that point I couldn't afford to be picky. My other efforts at finding work hadn't panned out at all. Within less than 24 hours after I applied, I received a response asking me to come out and meet them the next day. I checked my calendar, and I was free. The town was basically one main road running straight through the center of town. There were a few homes on each side. A lot of them were multi-level homes, with some having yards neglected and needing a sprucing up. I pulled up to the house with my GPS blaring. "You have arrived at your destination." I got out of my car and took a moment to look around a bit more. As I was scanning, my eyes met those of an elderly man sitting in a chair on his front porch. I smiled and waved, but instead of returning the gesture, he stared back at me with a blank expression. He had that 1,000-yard stare going, and it made me shiver a bit, despite it being quite warm outside. I didn't see anyone else out and heard no sounds except an occasional bird chirping somewhere unseen. There was an eerie calmness about the whole area. Answering the front door after several knocks was an elderly man. He introduced himself as Douglas. He waved me inside and asked me to take a seat in the living room. I sat down in an open chair as Douglas said he'd be right back and walked upstairs. I heard Douglas lose his footing a couple of times, and I heard a thud on the wooden stairs every few steps. I got up and walked out to the bottom of the stairs. "Are you okay, sir?" I called out. By the time I got over, I saw him disappear around the corner upstairs. He never did answer me. I retook my seat in the living room and looked around the place. The TV had some old game show on that I didn't recognize. I have to be honest, the whole place looked a bit unkempt and dusty. And then there was a smell. It was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Kind of musty, like they hadn't opened the house up in a while. I sat and waited for a while. The whole time I heard talking from upstairs, even with the TV on. I'm guessing Douglas was talking to his wife. I wanted to get this guy in, though. Lord knows I needed this job. Finally, after a while, Douglas came back down, this time accompanied by his wife. "Hello, my dear. My name is Martha. How do you do?" Her stare threw me off a little bit. I extended my hand to shake hers. But all she did was give me that familiar stare like the man outside earlier did. She turned to her husband, and he simply nodded. She awkwardly extended her hand, and we shook. I swear I felt something tingling beneath the skin on her palm. Another shiver came over me as we talked for a bit, and I got mostly yes and no answers to my questions. Before I could ask about the lack of wanting any references, I had nature calling me to find the bathroom. Martha directed me to one through the kitchen and down another hallway. Her instructions weren't too helpful, but I eventually found it. The musty smell assaulted my nostrils as soon as I opened the door. Good God, I said, trying to cover my nose and mouth as best I could. I thought about cracking the window but decided to get done and out of there. When I opened the toilet, I was only held as another wave of stench hit me. What's worse was what was inside: bugs everywhere. Some looked dead, but most were squirming around in the water or on the walls. Many climbed over each other to get out, and as they fell out, they came right to my feet. I stepped on a few, and they crushed like dry leaves under my shoes. Jesus, I said. I pulled the door open so hard it slammed into the walls when I let go. I ran into the hallway, ready to both apologize for slamming the door and to let them know about their obvious bug problem. But I only made it the first few feet when I stopped dead in my tracks. At the end of the long hallway was Martha. She was standing there completely still. The lighting in the hallway wasn't too good, so I could barely see her face, much less anything else. "You okay, my dear? We heard you scream. Everything all right?" "Oh yeah, you guys have a lot of bugs in here. Maybe cockroaches, I couldn't tell. And I'm really sorry about the door." "Don't worry about the door, dear. It happens all the time. Come into the kitchen, we'll have some tea." I really didn't like tea, but I figured I needed to try and make up some ground with them after what had happened. Martha went into the kitchen, and I soon followed. She reached into the cabinet and started pulling out seemingly everything inside. "Can I help you with something?" It was then I stopped talking and took a closer look at my surroundings. On top of the cabinets, on top of the refrigerator, even on her clothes, were mobile bugs, possibly hundreds of them, all with their little antennas slowly waving around. And many of them seemed to be looking right at me with their compound eyes. "Martha," I started, stepping out of the kitchen back towards the living room. "Where's the front door?" "Yes, there." She was still fumbling around when she finally pulled out the little seeker she'd found. I took a quick peek behind me, and Douglas was nowhere to be seen. I turned around to see Martha standing close to me, her nose almost touching mine. "Ah," I yelled when I landed harder on my back. Martha stood over me as she had handfuls of the creatures crawling all over her clothes and skin. Some fell off onto me, and I tried to flick them off. "While you're going, my dear, do you not want some tea?" she spoke, and a couple of things flew out of her mouth, and I even saw a tooth come out as well. I sprang to my feet and turned towards the door, smacking right into the thick frame of Douglas. I fell back again, but not all the way this time. I grabbed a chair for support and half nodded as the two bodies of Douglas and Martha slowly advanced towards me. It was at this point that something came over me, and I made a split-second decision, one that I would soon come to regret. I got to my feet and sprinted right past both of them, or in between them as they tried to grab me, and ended up falling into each other. I made it to the front door and reached for the handle. It took me a couple of seconds to realize there was no handle. I tried to find another way to get the door open, but nothing would work. I frantically looked around for some other way out. There was no way I was getting into the kitchen or hallway again. I had only one choice: the upstairs. I took the steps two at a time, almost slipping in the process twice. The upstairs was no better than downstairs. It was dark and musty. The smell putrid. I covered my mouth and nose with one hand while I tried to open every door I came to. None of them opened, but I swear each time I touched a handle, I could hear muffled voices behind the doors, as if they were crying out for help. Finally, the last door I came to swung open with a little effort. The door was small and set up with only a single bed and mattress along with a nightstand. The bed was currently unoccupied, and both windows had bars crudely placed over them. I caught my breath when I was shoved hard from behind. "This one's for you." I turned my head to see Douglas standing over me. I swear he had a look of satisfaction on his face. Martha followed behind him. They always run so predictable. She looked down at me, and then at Douglas before turning back to head down a hallway. "I'll get you that tea since you'll be staying up with us now." She laughed in a strange way that sounded forced, unnatural to her. I turned back to Douglas, who had now crouched down beside me. "Hua, let's get comfortable in bed." Our brothers and sisters are waiting," he pointed with both index fingers to the empty room. That's when I heard the sounds of a million now scratching on the inside of the walls, scratching to get out and get me. He dragged me onto the bed, even as I tried to resist. I had lost the will to fight as soon as I'd entered this room. This had been the plan the whole time, and I walked right into it. God only knows how many hours they trapped in there. Douglas threw me onto the bed hard, and we struggled against one another. He held my arms tight and straddled my pelvis to hold me down. "Now, darling, you'll only hurt for a moment," he leered at me and opened his mouth wide. And then I heard his jaw pop out of place. I could hear a loud hissing noise from deep in his throat. Then I saw them making their way up and out of his mouth, two thick hairs and all antennae. They moved about as wide as the head of some godforsaken monster as they pushed their way up through his throat. As this was happening, I could feel something latching onto me, lifting me up a bit. I searched all around me for anything. To my left, sitting on the nightstand, was a lamp. It wasn't plugged in, but it was the only weapon I had. I pushed Douglas off me and onto the floor. At that moment, I heard this thing start to emerge. I saw two huge, dark compound eyes look at me before I took the lamp and smashed it. I don't know, maybe a dozen times until it stopped squealing, and there was nothing more than a bloody pulp on the floor. I was angry now. I wanted revenge. Still holding the lamp, I took off into the hallway and crept down the stairs until I reached the bottom. I heard Martha still in the kitchen, fumbling around. I made my way towards her, stopping just before the open doorway. Martha was trying to harm some tune of tea, and she had her back to me. I ran in, gripping the lamp in both hands. "Here's your goddamn tea," I smacked her on the head, and she fell into the cabinets hard. Her whole body spasmed as I dropped the lamp and ran into the hallway, the one I said I'd never go back down again. I remembered now the bathroom had a window. I opened the bathroom door, and so much fresher air escaped from this place. And much to my surprise, there wasn't a bug in sight. I found a window and pushed the screen. I climbed out and ran through the tall grass and weeds, right to my car. That's when I saw them. People standing in front of their homes, most of them elderly, some young, but they were all standing there, looking right at me. Then, they opened their mouths and started emitting a collective hissing noise. It was so loud and awful I had to cover my ears as I got into my car. I flirted in reverse, with all these people still standing now pointing at me. As I drove away, I looked and saw the man I had waved at earlier when I arrived in town. He was waving back this time and had the fakest smile I'd ever seen. His waving arm fell off his shoulder as he looked down at it. I turned away in disgust and never looked back. When I was sure I was safe and far enough away, I stopped and called the police from a gas station. I found there wasn't a real police department, and they said they'd go look at it right away. When they questioned me 2 days later, back at my apartment, they told me the whole town had been abandoned. There was no trace of anyone's homes left empty, some still with TVs on. I asked about any people trapped in the house I was at. The officer just shook his head silently. It took a while, but I did find another job at an assisted living facility. This one I applied for in person, though, and I'm happy to say it's a great place. A bit of a drive, but it's worth it. No bugs, as far as I can tell. I just want to leave you this warning, though. Those things, wherever they were, are still out there somewhere. I don't know what they are or where they came from, and I think I made a mistake by killing what was inside of Douglas. At night, I can hear the sounds of scratching in my walls. It's my turn for payback. So watch out for news of strange disappearances in your area. And if you ever see a posting like the one I did on Craigslist or anywhere else, take my advice, avoid them at all costs. I have to go now, the scratching's getting louder. Story 24. I'm a passionate gamer, but when the PlayStation 5 hit the market, it was out of my budget. I kept an eye on Craigslist hoping for a good deal. Eventually I found one at a great price and knew I had to act fast. Upon replying to the ad, within an hour I got a response from a man named Cam. We exchanged messages and agreed to meet at a nearby Walmart for the exchange. I felt a bit nervous meeting someone from the internet, but the allure of the PS5 was too strong to resist. As I walked to the Walmart, scanning the parking lot, I spotted him, a tall, broad-shouldered man with tattoos covering his arms, reminiscent of someone fresh out of prison. My heart sank as I approached him. "Hey, are you the one buying the PlayStation?" he asked in a gruff voice. Nervously I nodded, trying to maintain a smile. "Yeah, that's me." "Are you Cam?" He nodded and motioned for me to follow him. "Yeah, that's me." "Follow me, I'll take you to it." Following him to his beat-up sedan, my nerves began to escalate. But I reminded myself it was just a Craigslist transaction I'd done many without incident. Standing beside his car, he gestured for me to get in. "Well, get in," he said. Surprised, I asked, "You don't have it here, it's not my place." I didn't have time to put it in the car. "Just get in," he replied casually. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was no way I was getting into his car. How could you not have time to put it in? It takes 2 seconds, I protested, making up an excuse and walking away quickly. Glancing back from a safe distance, I felt relief seeing that Cam wasn't following me, however. He stood by his car, staring at me with a menacing look. I considered calling the cops, convinced he was up to something, but I lacked substantial evidence. Offering someone a ride isn't illegal, so reluctantly I let it go. Story 25. I had been unemployed for a few weeks, desperate to find anything that would pay. While scrolling through Craigslist, an ad caught my attention, a simple request for help with odd jobs around the house for a day. It wasn't the permanent solution I hoped for, but a day of work was better than nothing. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to cover my bills for a few days. I replied to the ad, and to my surprise, I got a response within minutes. The man on the other end introduced himself as Terry and gave me his address. He explained that his house was being refinished and needed somebody to come in and clean up the mess. I thought that was a little strange, because I assumed that the contractors would clean up after themselves, but maybe not. The next morning, I rode my bike over to Terry's house, a small 2-story brick house in a quiet neighborhood. I rang the doorbell and waited. The door opened, and Terry greeted me with a smile. He was a middle-aged man, balding with a slight beer belly, wearing a stained white t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants. "Good morning," he said as he stepped aside to let me in. "Good morning," I replied. As I stepped into his living room, I noticed it was well lit with light blue walls and a large brown sofa in the center. There was a coffee table in front of the sofa with a few magazines scattered across it. There was no sign of any construction work having taken place. That confused me slightly, but I figured it could be in a different part of the house. "Let me show you around," Terry said, leading me to the back of the house. We walked through the kitchen and into the backyard where there was a shed. Terry opened the door, and I saw a few tools and paint cans on the shelves. "I need you to organize this and clean it up a bit," he said, pointing out the shed. "Sure thing," I replied. If I spent the next hour or so cleaning the shed and organizing the tools. When I finished, I went back into the house and let Terry know. "Good job," he said, smiling. "Now let me show you where the real work is." He led me down a flight of stairs to the basement. The basement was dimly lit with a concrete floor and exposed pipes. There were a few boxes and a workbench in the corner, but no sign of any construction work. "I need you to clean up down here," Terry said, pointing at the corner. "There's a bit of a mess, but it shouldn't take you too long." I walked over to the corner and saw a pile of old newspapers and some dust on the floor. I started sweeping and cleaning, but I really felt like something wasn't right. Terry was standing in the corner watching me. As I was sweeping, I accidentally knocked over a box and a few items spilled out. I bent over and picked them up. It looked like a bunch of old pictures. I gathered a handful of them ready to put them back in the box. Then one of the images caught my eye. It looked like some kind of creepy role-playing thing. There were people tied up wearing strange outfits. I was pretty weirded out by that, and I wanted to leave. And I saw Terry was gone. The door was closed, I recounted, growing increasingly panicked. "Terry," I called out, "what's going on?" but there was no response. I started to panic. I looked around the room for another way out. And I noticed a small window near the ceiling. It looked too small for me to fit through. But I could see outside. I pushed a few boxes under the window, managed to climb up, and opened it. I squeezed through the tiny space and retrieved my bike, which was still locked up out front. As I was riding away, I was shaking from the adrenaline, I admitted. After I was a few miles away, I stopped and called the police. They came to Terry's house and talked to him. But he had an excuse for what happened. He told me that I was helping clean his house, but I was acting strangely. He said that he thought I was on drugs, so he asked me to leave. He said that I must have called the police to get back at him. That was all total BS, I muttered, frustrated and scared that nothing could be done. And there was no evidence of any wrongdoing. I knew that I had to warn others. So I decided to post an ad on Craigslist to tell people about him. I described the situation in detail and urged others to be careful when responding to ads like Terry's. Whenever I look back at this incident, I realize how lucky I was to have escaped, I concluded. There's no telling what Terry's intentions were, but they certainly weren't good. Story 26. I'm Derek, and this is a really scary thing that happened to me about a year ago. I had a camera that I didn't use anymore. I was really into photography for a while, but I didn't have much time for it anymore. The camera was a high-end model, and it was in excellent condition. I posted on Craigslist hoping to sell it locally and avoid the hassle of shipping it somewhere. It wasn't long before responses started coming in. One of them was from a guy named Dan. He offered to buy my camera for less than half of what it was worth. I was insulted by the offer and told him so. But he persisted, sending multiple messages every day. He kept making lowball offers, and I kept refusing. Eventually, he made a decent offer, and I actually agreed to sell it to him. We arranged to meet at a subway station near my apartment. I was looking forward to finally making the sale and moving on with my life. When I arrived at the subway station, I saw 3 men standing there where we agreed to meet. They were all much larger than me, and they were all staring at me. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I tried to remain calm. "Hi, Dan," I said, walking over to them. "Hey," he said with a smirk. I nodded to each of the men, but I could feel their eyes sizing me up. I started to regret agreeing to meet them here. There was a tension in the air that I can't quite explain, and I told myself not to be afraid. "So do you have the camera?" Dan asked. I nodded and pulled it out of my bag. "Here it is, in great condition." Just like I said, Dan took the camera from me and inspected it carefully. He turned it over in his hand, looking at it from every angle. I could see the other men watching him, their eyes darting from the camera to me, and then back again. Finally, Dan handed the camera back to me. "This isn't worth what you're asking for," he said in an aggressive tone. I felt a sinking feeling in my chest. I had expected this, but I'd hoped he would at least stick to his word. "I'm sorry, but we agreed on the price already. I can't go any lower than that." I felt very intimidated with those 3 men standing over me. It was like an unspoken implication that things would go wrong if I argued any more. Dan stepped closer to me, his face inches from mine. "Listen, kid, I'm doing you a favor by even offering you this much. You should take it and be grateful." I could feel his breath on my face, and I felt a surge of anger. Who was he to talk to me like that? I took a step back and stood up straighter. "I can't go any lower." "Take it or leave it," I said with force and confidence. Dan's face twisted in anger. Then he lifted up his shirt, revealing a gun in his waist. I was feeling very threatened. The other 2 men were standing there stone-faced. "Now listen," he said, pointing at me. "You're going to take the money that I'm offering, and you're going to hand over that camera." I felt really terrified. I didn't know what to do. The other men had circled around me. I could feel their presence closing in. I knew I had to get out of there. I didn't want to give in to these bullies. However, as I looked into Dan's eyes, I saw something that scared me even more than the gun. It was a glint of madness, a look that said he was willing to do anything to get what he wanted. I knew I had to be careful. Okay, I said, holding my hands in surrender. "I'll take the money." They each took a half step back, and I felt a surge of relief. "Good," he said. "I knew you'd come to your senses." He handed me the wad of cash, and I quickly counted it. It was less than half what we'd agreed on, but I knew I had to take it and get out of there. As I handed over the camera, I felt a pang of regret. I knew I'd let these guys take me for a sucker, and I felt really crappy. The men walked away, and I stood there feeling numb. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt a mix of emotions. I was angry, scared, and disappointed. I couldn't believe that people can be so ruthless, so willing to do anything for money. When I got back to my apartment, I sat down and tried to process what had just happened. I looked at the money on the table, feeling both disgusted and ashamed of myself. But as I sat there, I realized I couldn't just let it go. I had to do something. I couldn't just let those guys get away with what they had done. I had to stand up for myself to make sure that they were held accountable. I picked up the phone and called the police. I told them what happened, giving them as much detail as I could. They listened patiently and asked me questions to clarify. When I had finished, the officer on the other end of the line told me that they would do everything they could to help. They took down my information and promised to follow up. A few days later, I received a call from the police. They had located Dan and his friends, and they had found the camera in their possession. They denied everything, of course, but the police told me that Dan agreed to return the camera if I gave back the money. I'm sure he tried to spin it like I was crazy or something, It wasn't the perfect outcome, but I took it. I felt like I was bullied and pushed around by a group of fake tough guys. They really should have been charged with assault or something. But I know there's really no way to prove it. Even if there was surveillance footage, it really wouldn't have shown anything incriminating. I guess it's best to just let this one go. Story 27. I bought a new car last year, so I decided to put my old one on Craigslist since I used it to buy and sell other stuff. Over the next few days, I received some responses. Most were lowball offers, and some were obviously scams. But eventually I got a reply from a guy named Sal, and he offered me the full price that I was asking. I thought it was a fair price, if not a little low already, so it was not surprising. He wanted to meet up and take a look at it, and possibly take it for a test drive. We arranged to meet at a gas station near my house. When I arrived at the gas station, I saw who I assumed was Sal standing by a beat-up pickup truck. He was the only one there, so I figured it must be him. He was a short, stocky man with a thick beard and a bald head. He looked a bit creepy, but I tried not to judge too quickly. I parked at the front and waved him over. I moved into the passenger seat of my car, and Sal got into the driver's seat. We took off down the road, and I couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. Sal seemed like a strange character, and I wasn't sure if I could trust him. As we drove down the road, he started asking me all sorts of questions about the car. He seemed to be very knowledgeable about cars, much more than me. He even offered to pay me the full asking price right then and there. I was a bit surprised that he was willing to pay so much money without even haggling with me, but I was thrilled because it meant I was going to be able to get a good deal for the car. We drove to the DMV and filled out the paperwork for the sale. Sal handed me a cashier's check for the full amount, and I was really happy about it. I went to the bank and deposited the check. But when I handed it to the teller, she looked at me in a strange way. She then said that she needed to get her manager. The two of them approached me and told me that the check was fake. I couldn't believe it. I trusted Sal, and he lied to me. I tried to contact him, but he never answered any of my calls or emails. Regrettably, I didn't get any of his actual information in the transfer. Come to think of it, I'd be surprised if his real name was actually Sal. I felt really angry and disappointed. I put my trust in a stranger, and he took advantage of me. I felt like I lost not only my car but also my self-respect. I was so upset that I didn't even want to tell my wife what had happened. I had always thought that I was good at spotting a scam and never fall for the really obvious ones. This one was different. We dealt face to face. In my experience, it's usually pretty safe. I thought there must be some way to track them down. But when I looked it up online, I found that it's actually a pretty common scam, and there's really no way to get your stuff back. This was an expensive lesson that I'll never forget. Story 28. This happened quite a while back when I was 18 years old. I lived with my folks even though I had recently moved on from secondary school. I just purchased another PC. Furthermore, after I was finished getting it set up, I posted my old one on Craigslist. It was just 2 years old. Yet in those days that implied it was obsolete. It was a Dell PC with fair specs, and it was very nearly $2,000 fresh out of the box. I was asking for just $500 because more current workstations at the time were significantly better. After posting it on the web, I didn't need to wait long for a reaction. A person named Toby informed me I was inspired by the PC, but I needed to see it first. I needed to set up a chance to meet next week, when I would be in Midtown. That way we could meet at a bistro or something like that. At the point when I proposed it, Toby said that he wanted it immediately. Therefore, I consented to allow him to approach my home. I realized gathering in a public place would be more brilliant. Be that as it may, our home was in suburbia, and I didn't have a vehicle. I realized it was apathetic and moronic. Yet, I gave him my residence. My folks weren't home, and I figured it'd be a speedy deal and that nothing would turn out badly, I thought. Toby appeared sometime thereafter, on a Saturday at around 7 p.m. I saw a more seasoned van maneuver into the carport, and a man got out. In any case, he was not alone. He had one more person with him. The two of them were no less than 30, a lot greater than me. When that's what I saw, I felt somewhat frightened. Something about their presence felt off. In any case, I forgot about the inclination. All things considered, they were only there to check a PC out. I let them in, and we set up in the kitchen, I recalled. I started showing the PC to Toby, and then his companion promptly requested that I utilize the restroom. I pointed him to the correct heading, which was not far off and down a short passage. Then, At that point, I zeroed in on showing the PC to Toby. Around 10 minutes passed while we were checking it out. I had deleted it in advance, so it was fundamentally running as new. Then, at that point, I unexpectedly understood that the other man hadn't gotten back from the washroom. "Hello, he's your companion," I greeted Toby. "Good," Toby replied. "No doubt, you can take some time some of the time, just relax." I listened as intently as I could and heard strides that weren't coming from the washroom area. They were coming from higher up. Since there were only the three of us in the house, I realized it was him. The restroom was on the main floor, so there was not a great explanation for him to be up there. That was when I started to overreact inside, however. I attempted to conceal it. I nonchalantly asked Toby about his friend once more, hoping my anxiety wasn't showing. His response was cold and frightening. He put his hand on my shoulder, not in a friendly way, but with a lot of tension. He told me not to worry about it. His grasp was fixed agonizingly. And at that moment I realized this was something other than a deal that turned out badly. We were being robbed. That was probably the plan all along. Alarms set in that I attempted to keep my poise. I advised Toby to take anything they desired and simply go, but he didn't give up. His grasp on my shoulder felt hard. It was like a threat, and I started to shake. I knew I needed to move quickly. I managed to break away and lock myself in my father's office on the main floor, locking the door behind me. I left my phone on the kitchen table, which was a dumb mistake. Fortunately, though, there was a landline in the office where I was, so that saved me. My heart was beating as I dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. The man is hoping that the police will show up on the longest day of his life. I could hear the two men stepping around the house, probably taking anything they could find. They probably knew the police were on their way since they took off in no time and dashed away. When I was sure they were gone, I emerged to see what was taken. The main things I saw missing on the main floor were the small television in the kitchen and the PC that I was selling. However, I later found out that most of my mother's jewelry was taken, as well as at least $200 in cash. The police arrived around 10 minutes after the burglars left. They stayed for a while, but then they left without making any commitments. It was disappointing. That was the last I heard from the police about what happened. I contacted them a few times, but they never got back to me. When my parents and sister returned home, I had to explain what happened. They initially thought I was joking since I have a dark, funny bone, but when they realized it was real, they were mad too. I would estimate the losses at around $3,000, which was a huge amount of money for me at that time. Since it was all my fault, I had to take responsibility for it. That was essentially my whole summer of work down the drain. It was the last time I met a strange person off the internet. If I was ever to repeat it, there'd be no chance I would allow them to come to my place. It's a public or private arrangement with no exceptions. Story 29. It was around this time last year when I decided to use Craigslist as a means to sell a few things I had to get rid of. My house was getting cluttered and I planned to get some new furniture, and with winter right around the corner, I wanted to get these things out fast. The main piece I was selling were these two lounge chairs in my living room. They were really big and a bit outdated, but still fully functional and didn't have any stains or rips on them. It only took about half a day for a few responses to come in, but 2 of the 3 gave me lowball offers, so there was really only one guy who was serious about buying them. He wanted to take a look at them after work that day, sometime around 6 or 6.30 I thought. I of course agreed, just happy to get them out quickly. Now usually I'd try to meet up somewhere public, but honestly I didn't have a way to transport the chairs, and even if I did, I don't think I could lift them myself anyway, I reasoned, so I sent him my address. Come 6 o'clock, I turned on the front porch light and opened up the curtains on the windows, then sat in the living room on my phone while I waited for them to show up. I remembered. Probably 20 minutes passed before a truck pulled into my driveway. They took a few minutes before getting out and walking up to the door. I said hi and let him in, I recalled. He was an average-looking man, late 20s or early 30s, wearing typical work clothes. His name was Matt, and he started up some small talk, telling me about why he was excited about getting the chairs and everything. The guy seemed really nice, and I felt relieved that this would be quick and easy, I thought. We walked around the chair and sat in it and seemed to enjoy it. We talked about price, and he was good to give me what I listed it for, but just as we were about to exchange cash, we both heard a car door slam shut. It sounded like it was right in the driveway where he'd parked his truck, I realized. Matt quickly went outside to check on it, and I just watched, not really sure what was going on. I looked through the window and there were no other cars out there, so someone had to have been messing with his truck. A minute later, Matt came in clearly angry and said someone stole a bunch of stuff out of his car, I recalled. I could tell that he was not so trusting of me, like he thought I had something to do with it. I obviously didn't, and I said that, but he was right to be skeptical, and I was also right to be skeptical of him. I still didn't know if this was some kind of setup, but before anything could be worked out, we heard footsteps quickly approaching the front door. I remembered. We turned and looked over, seeing a guy in a hood push the door open and step inside my house. His eyes were bloodshot and he looked nothing short of insane. He stared at us, standing just a few feet away, looking like he was in a complete state of rage, I recalled. The guy was young though, only a kid, maybe 18 or 19 years old, but still dangerous nonetheless. Both Matt and I stood still, trying to not provoke anything to happen, but then Matt started telling the kid to take it easy. He held his hands up and took a step closer, but the kid was quick to pull the weapon out of his pocket and aim it right at him, I recounted. Yes, it could have been fake, but there was no way to tell, and from the way the kid was acting, I really don't think it was he yelled at Matt to walk out the door, and now in shock he did as he said. The kid then followed him out of the house, and held him at gunpoint the whole way to the truck, I continued. I watched in terror as he pulled out and drove away, obviously outside of Matt's will. As soon as they were gone, I called 911, then ran to my car and tried to follow them while describing what was going on to the operator, but they were gone. I couldn't find any sign of them, I admitted. The police ran an investigation, using the information I had to quickly identify who Matt was and his truck's license plate. Over the next couple days, I was just waiting for a call, but that call never came. Both Matt and his truck still have never turned up, I sighed. I feel guilty, like I should have done more, but everything was so risky, and I likely could have lost my life as well. And even in those final moments of the interaction, I didn't know for sure if Matt was in on it as some sort of elaborate plan. I don't know what that kid wanted, or why any of it happened. It's been almost a full year though, and I don't think it's likely that anything more will be known, I concluded. Story 30. I've always been a fan of perusing Craigslist for deals and uncovering unique items that elude mainstream stores. One day, I chanced upon an ad for a vintage record player in impeccable condition. Unable to resist, I promptly fired off an email to the seller to inquire about it. To my surprise, Jack, the seller, replied within minutes, and our conversation swiftly delved into the specifics of the item. Jack appeared friendly and eager to facilitate the sale as we exchanged messages. We agreed to meet later that week at his apartment to finalize the transaction. When the appointed time arrived, I found myself at the apartment complex and made my way to Jack's unit. Upon entering, a sense of unease washed over me. There was an indefinable strangeness lingering in the air. Jack greeted me warmly, albeit with a peculiar energy. He seemed jittery and on edge, though I attributed it to natural anxiety. Upon inspecting the record player, I was delighted to discover it was in even better condition than depicted in the photos. Just as I was prepared to proceed with the purchase, Jack interjected, proposing to show me something intriguing in another room. Though hesitant, I consented, and we ventured to the back of the apartment. In that room, an assortment of seemingly random objects cluttered the space. Jack directed my attention to a large trunk tucked away in a corner, suggesting there might be something of interest inside. As he lifted the lid, a musty odor assailed my senses, causing dizziness. Beneath a tattered white sheet lay an unknown object, but I found myself unable to investigate further, overwhelmed by the noxious scent. Sorry, I managed. The smell is overwhelming. I turned away, intending to leave, but Jack persisted, urging me to take a quick look, promising I wouldn't regret it. Disconcerted by the encounter, I ignored his pleas and swiftly departed the apartment, my head spinning. Struggling to maintain my balance, I hurried to my car, driven by an urgent need to escape. Within moments, I succumbed to the overpowering sensation of lightheadedness, losing consciousness briefly. Upon regaining awareness, I found myself parked in a nearby neighborhood, disoriented and bewildered. The subsequent events are hazy in my memory. Darkness enveloped the sky, and my thoughts were clouded. Somehow I managed to navigate home, gradually emerging from the fog of confusion. As clarity returned, I contacted the authorities, recounting my unsettling experience. The police visited Jack's apartment, yet he denied the existence of any such trunk. and their search yielded nothing incriminating. Despite the lack of tangible evidence, I remained convinced that something was amiss. Perhaps it was paranoia, or maybe the noxious odor was indeed a potent substance emanating from the trunk. Had I lingered longer, the outcome might have been dire.